Hi, welcome to Legally Speaking. I'm your host, Sophia Haynes. Tonight we have a great show for you as part of our Back to School series. Our guest today is Teri Brown Walker. Welcome, Teri.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Let's start off, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay, my name is Teri Brown Walker. I am a career prosecutor. I have been a prosecutor in 3 metro offices here in Atlanta, beginning with the Atlanta Solicitor's Office, then the Fulton County Solicitor's Office, and currently with the DeKalb County Solicitor's Office.
So you've been a busy lady the last 10 years.
I have.
Well, let's just jump right into it. Tonight's show is Crim Law and Our Teens, and the purpose of this show is to give parents information about common behaviors that their kids get into that are actually crimes, so that the parents can prepare themselves by giving information and maybe prohibit some of our children from entering the justice system. Could you tell our audience first, what is the age of adulthood for criminal justice purposes in the state of Georgia?
It's 17 years old, and 17 years old could include, interestingly enough, juniors and seniors in high school. They could get in trouble potentially and be tried as adults. So that's something that parents need to be aware of.
That is powerful. Look into that camera again and tell them exactly what that means.
At age 17, you could be charged with a felony. You would be considered an adult, and that's very, very serious. You could be a senior or a junior in high school.
Now, could you tell our audience as well, we remember growing up, and we rode in cars with our friends, and we did a whole lot of stuff. Throughout your career, what have you seen that teens thought was just pranks, maybe, that were actually crimes?
One that pops into my mind is throwing toilet paper on people's property. I didn't participate in that, but believe it or not, that can be criminal trespass if the owner of the property chooses to pursue it. You can't go on people's property and cause damage. Now, toilet paper is very minor damage, but it's still damage, and it interferes with the property owner's use and enjoyment of his property. Another one that we see a lot is loitering. You're not doing anything per se, but it's just being there at a time that's kind of a nuisance to a business, sometimes gas stations. If you're not patronizing the store, you need to go in or stay out, but not to hang around the periphery or the outside of the businesses.
So what if the store owner comes out and say, I really need you to leave from the front of my store? Do you have the right to say, oh, this is America, I can stand wherever I want to stand? I mean, where does that line come?
You have the right to say that, but you're still violating the law, because that property owner or business owner or their representative can say to you, we don't want you here on the property and you must leave. So you may voice that opinion, but you would be violating the law and you have to leave.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about prosecution in Georgia. How is the prosecution scheme set up in Georgia?
Well, prosecution usually begins when someone is arrested, and that's what they're taken into custody, and then paperwork is forwarded to a prosecutor's office, and then a prosecutor or has some kind of screening mechanism whereby they look into the police report and determine how they want to proceed with the case.
Is that always the DA? Or we hear about the DA all the time.
Actually, it's not. In Georgia, there are 2 prosecuting offices in general. Most counties have 2 elected prosecutors, one being the district attorney, the other one being a solicitor general.
Solicitor general. So what exactly is a solicitor general?
The solicitor general is responsible for prosecuting misdemeanor cases,
okay,
and the district attorney is responsible for prosecuting felony cases. Now, the distinction is the amount of time. With the felony cases, you're going to be charged. There's a greater time associated with the jail time, and then a fine more than $1,000. A misdemeanor case, less than a year in jail and less than a $1,000 fine.
So if I'm charged with something I think is a misdemeanor, I need to be trying to find the solicitor general. And if it's something that is traditionally known as a felony, I need to go try to find the district attorney.
That's correct. And a lot of times people don't realize, but in the state of Georgia, the traffic offenses can be considered misdemeanors, depending on how you're charged. That means running a stop sign, failure to yield. Those are misdemeanor cases. Generally, the solicitor general is going to handle those charges.
So if I do a traffic offense, that's a crime in Georgia?
Yes.
So I'm looking at that same potential 12 months in jail.
Potentially, yes. and up to $1,000 fine.
So it sounds like I need to know who my prosecutor is.
Yes, you do.
Okay, well, let's go back, and we're talking about our teens. What are some other things that you've seen that are pranks, but actually also crimes?
Well, maybe not pranks, but one thing that we've definitely seen that's problematic for us in law enforcement is sexting or sending text with sexually suggestive photos. While Georgia does not have a law that specifically prohibits the behavior, it's still very, very problematic. And with a very creative prosecutor, your child may face criminal charges. Not under a per se violation of a sexting law, but maybe public indecency, that sort of thing. And even if it's not criminal behavior, it's problematic because your child is transmitting images to people that they may think are their friends, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but once they hit the send button, they don't have any control over where those photographs go.
That's the World Wide Web.
That's the World Wide Web, and there's some really creepy people out there. So you've got this photo of yourself all over the world, all over the web, in inappropriate places, and I think that's what's really, really frightening, to entice people, all sorts of things that are very inappropriate. And I don't think young people realize that when they're just taking photos of their genitals and sending it out. So
and as usual, young people don't think about the long-term effects of what's happening.
Right.
So parents, that means you need to check your children's phones and make sure that they're not having inappropriate images on there, because you don't want to be at the mercy of someone to determine whether you're going to have criminal charges or not. Let's talk about theft. From my understanding, there's a thin line between a misdemeanor and a felony. So could you tell us, how, an example maybe of how I may go in thinking I'm doing one thing, but I actually end up with a felony offense just because I went in Walmart and picked up something?
Well, there is a very thin line between misdemeanor and felony theft, and it has to do with a dollar amount. Any merchandise that you either conceal or even alter the tag on, and you've changed the price, if it exceeds $300, then that's going to be a felony. So if you take bubble gum, sundry items, deodorant, hairspray, that's going to be considered misdemeanor theft by shoplifting. And you definitely don't want a theft. You don't want any criminal history, but certainly not any that include theft. So
let me make sure I understand this. I don't have to get out of the store with it.
No.
If I just change the tag to give me a discount.
Absolutely.
I didn't like Kroger's discount, so I want to add my own on there.
Exactly.
And if I just take the tag off and I don't even get out the door, I have committed shoplifting.
Inadvertently, you have to have the intent to permanently deprive the store, but you really don't want to conceal items, and I think it's very easy to do. You're looking at handbags and you're trying to carry all of your items, but you can't conceal items. That's a form of theft by shoplifting. Altering tags, walking past the checkpoint without purchasing the items, and it can be easy to do, but you still need to be very mindful of your belongings and what you're doing when you're in a store. And usually when you're talking about teenagers and crime, they're co-defendants. In other words, there's a group. And I hate to say
they don't travel alone. They do travel in packs. You're right about that.
They don't travel alone, and it becomes shop owners are going to watch you. So you need to be very, very careful about your movement and your behavior.
How important is it the other kids that my child may hang around?
I think it's very important. Parents should definitely know who their children are hanging around, like I said, because a lot of times these cases include more than one person. Maybe not a co-defendant in terms of they were actually committing a crime with your child, but just the association, the influence. So you certainly want to be involved, and particularly with theft by shoplifting. I know as a young person, my parents purchased my clothes. My mother was very much a close monitor of knowing where my clothing came from. So if you notice that your child is wearing accessories or has clothing that maybe you didn't purchase, you might need to pay attention to who they're hanging around. Doesn't mean that that's necessarily the case, but that could be a telltale sign.
Now that's something I don't understand. Okay, I know what I bought, and if I see you coming in with product in Burberry and I know I didn't buy it, seems like the light bulb would come on for me.
It seems like it would, but Okay,
as I'm out, I see a lot of young people whose language, I mean, they make up words that I didn't even know existed, and they're able to put what we know as traditional curse words in all kind of screams and phrases that I didn't even think was possible.
Right.
Is there any potential criminal liability in that?
Absolutely. That would be, under a certain set of circumstances, be considered disorderly conduct and or fighting words, depending on how you craft your sentence, so to speak. And out in public, particularly in malls, at the movies where young people congregate, you need to be very, very careful about that loud, boisterous, profane language. That can be offensive and can get you in trouble.
Wow. So you said fighting words. Those are words that make you want to fight.
Pretty much. I mean, you just, when you hear it, you know what they are.
Now, before we go to break, I want to talk about potential dangers or situations our kids get into as far as riding in the car with their friends. We're going to the mall, we're going to the movies, and you and Junebug and Junior and all of them, all y'all riding in the car. And the police stop. What are some potential things that could happen just from you riding in the car unknowingly, just in your friend's mom's car?
Well, I mean, that's kind of broad. There are a lot of things that can go on. In some instances, you don't always know the character of the people that you're riding with, and if they have contraband, i.e. drugs and guns on them, and you're stopped by the police, and then it may not be you and it may not be the driver, but someone in the vehicle makes some furtive movements, some movements that seem suspicious to the officer, and then he's asking you all to step out of the vehicle. That's not the time for you not to be compliant with law enforcement. While it might be frightening and you may feel that your rights are being trampled upon or that it's not fair, that's not the time. It's the time for you to be very humble. Give the officer the information that he wants. And if unfortunately someone is being taken into custody, for the person who's being taken into custody, you should not fight with an officer. You do not want to resist. If you think you have a valid point, I would just ask that you remain humble and let your parents take care of it.
That's a good point. Let your parents handle that.
Let your parents handle it, because if you try to resist, it can get you hurt. Because the officer doesn't know that you're trying to explain your point. He might think that you're trying to hurt him, or her might think you're trying to hurt them. And if you are watching this incident, you need to stand back. Don't intervene. Once again, just be observant so that you can tell your parents the situation, but do not try to jump into that situation at all.
So that stuff they seeing on Law and Order and CSI, they need to ignore that.
They need to ignore it, because there are very, very narrow circumstances under which a citizen can really resist an arrest, and for the most time, I rarely see it happen. I've never really seen a person legitimately resist arrest.
Well, it sounds like the point is you don't know enough.
Right.
So just keep yourself out of trouble.
Right.
Well, let's take it up a notch, because I hear all the time, no snitching, no rats. And everybody know that Junebug in the car is the one that smokes marijuana. And the car gets stopped and marijuana is found, and everybody in the car knows that it's Junebug's marijuana, but we're not going to snitch. What could potentially happen to everybody in the car if the person that actually owns the marijuana or other contraband does not own up to that?
Potentially everybody in the vehicle can be charged, and it can be a very, very lengthy process and expensive process for you to get that untangled. And I would suggest that young people consider the long-term ramifications of not snitching. And I know it's difficult for them to think that far in advance, but they could really get in trouble for not telling the truth and not being forthright. If your friend would subject you to being in his or her vehicle and has stuff in there, then they really aren't really a friend without telling you. So
absolutely. I
definitely
totally
need to watch your associations. If they would subject you to that kind of potential harm and long-term ramification, you need to consider whether they're friends or not.
Yeah, very good point, and a great segue into our break. We're gonna take a break right now, and we come back. I want to talk about what happens if young people and their parents don't listen to anything that we just said, and try to give them some information on how to navigate this criminal justice system in a way that our kids will have a future. We'll be back in a couple of moments.
Hi, you're tuned into Legally Speaking, a public service of You and the Law. You and the Law is a nonprofit whose mission is to provide information and resources to empower you in your legal affairs. If you have a question or would like to have a topic featured, feel free to contact us online at www.youandthelawtoday.org. You can also sign up there for our mailing list and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We air a new show every Sunday at 6 o'clock, so make sure you tune in to see the new featured show. And remember, with every right comes responsibilities, so know your rights and accept your responsibilities.
Welcome back. We're talking to Teri Brown Walker, and she's trying to help us get information to make sure that our teens don't get caught up in the justice system unnecessarily. Now, Teri, before we went to break, we were talking about different common behaviors that could be crimes, and we were talking about things that parents can look out for. What I want to talk about now is, let's just say I'm a parent. I've done everything I could. I gave my child information, and they thought they knew more than I did, and now we're in a situation. And this child has been arrested. What is some crucial steps that a parent needs to do to deal with the arrest of that child?
Well, initially, of course, you want to find out where your child is, determine how much bond, how you can get them out of jail. But I think it's very important for parents to understand that your child is entitled to an attorney and legal counsel. And while parents may feel that they are the best advocate for their child, when a child has been arrested and is now going through the criminal justice process, they definitely need the guidance and counsel of an attorney. So I would suggest that first you obtain an attorney. And if you are unable to obtain an attorney, you can be appointed a court-appointed attorney, and you have to apply for that, and that's going to be based on the parent's financial situation. So all is not lost if you get a call in the middle of the night and you're not able to secure legal counsel right then. Usually when your child appears for court for the first time, if they've not been bonded out, you will have the opportunity to see if you can qualify for a public defender. After your child has, I guess, received whatever charges that they have, a parent can contact the prosecutor who is in charge of that case and ask if there are any pretrial diversion programs.
Now, tell us, what is pretrial diversion? I've heard of that.
Pretrial diversion is an excellent opportunity for people who are charged to have their cases dismissed, conditioned on them completing either a program that's appropriate for the type of charge that they've been charged with, and or some kind of community service or some kind of community involvement. And it's an excellent opportunity to preserve your criminal history, in that if you successfully complete the provisions that are required by the prosecutor, the case will be dismissed. And that is tremendous, because you need to guard your criminal history like your credit history. But unlike your credit history, your criminal history does not fall off after 7 years.
And, you know, and I used to hear that all the time about when this is gonna fall off, and I had to tell them, this is not your credit report, sweetheart.
It never falls off.
So at what point do I, as a parent, go and approach the prosecutor in this case to find out if my child's case is eligible for this pretrial diversion program that you're talking about?
As soon as possible, but a lot of prosecutors' offices are very proactive in that they will send information to you or your child. So one practical tip is to make sure that if you receive any court notices, that if you move or there's a change of address, that you let them know. Because sometimes you can receive information through the mail that's saying, we've considered you for a pretrial diversion program. We need you to contact our office. And before your child goes to court or anything, there's a way for you to actually go into a pretrial diversion program. And a lot of times, young people and adults as well wind up in court, but that's because they didn't take advantage of a pretrial diversion. And we see that in the file. And
let's follow up on that change of address. Okay, I got arrested and maybe we moved. And they sent my court notice to the other address. The next thing I know, here come the sheriff looking for me because I've missed a court appearance. So how important is it for you to make sure that the court and the prosecutor's office has update information for you to to get information to you.
It's absolutely vital, because if you do not appear for a court appearance, you can be issued a bench warrant, and that means they will come to your house, take you into custody, and sometimes if it's a no bond bench warrant, you will stay in jail until that judge issues a bond for you to be released. And sometimes they make you come to court so they can lay eyes on you and then decide whether they want to give you a bond.
Okay, so you need to keep your paperwork.
You need to keep your paperwork, and that's not a viable excuse for you to say, well, I lost my paperwork, because it's your responsibility to keep up with your affairs.
And it sounds like if you keep up, you can just save yourself a whole lot of grief anyway.
A lot of grief, but that is one area where parents can be very helpful for teens, because sometimes they can be forgetful, and you definitely need their paperwork in order, not only for court appearances, but information that you receive from the court so that you can give it to your attorney, so that you can help with their case. A lot of times young people forget things, but as a parent, that's one way you can help.
Okay, that's excellent information on that. So let's talk a little bit about I've heard about expungements. Could you tell the audience a little bit about the expungement process, how that happens, who normally qualify, what are the qualifiers, is there a certain process where it can get expunged immediately? Or is there a process where the prosecutor has to chime in on it to allow it to get expunged? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Expungements can be a very elaborate process, but usually it's only granted when a case has gone through a pretrial diversion. That means the participants, the defendant, the child or teenager or young adult has already complied with the provisions of the pretrial diversion, and as a reward, they can apply for expungement. And a lot of times people think that it's automatic. I've done what I'm supposed to, I've done my community service, I paid restitution, and they don't take the next step and apply. They apply for a job that does a criminal background check, and it pops up. So you have to take an affirmative step further. You have to apply for expungement. Now, expungements vary from office to office.
Okay.
And if there's a fine associated, which agency you turn your paperwork into, so you have to be very careful to follow the specific instructions for that office. And when I say that office, I mean that jurisdiction, that county, that courthouse, that prosecutor's office. And then you actually apply for expungement. There's some documents that you need to provide. It's not automatic. Expungement is not an option if you've taken a plea. And a lot of times people don't realize that NOLO is a plea.
Oh yeah, because we hear about NOLO all the time.
Yes.
I'm just gonna plea NOLO.
It's still a plea. Actually, DWOPs are dismissed for want of prosecution. For whatever reason, you get to a courtroom situation, either trial or a motion, and somehow the case is dismissed. That does not mean that the arrest or the record of that arrest is automatically off of your record. And very rarely will a DWOP usually be granted. And I think statutorily it kind of is not going to be a good choice for expungement.
Let's talk about dismissals and cases being dismissed, because I can remember as a prosecutor, folks coming up and saying, well, she wants to drop the charges, or he wants to drop the charges, and they can't understand why that person coming up doesn't have the ability to drop the charges. So could you tell the audience about what is that process of, once it gets into the prosecutor's hands, how it could go about being dismissed? Why is it that a person could not come and drop the charges?
Well, in a practical sense, we don't know if you have unduly influenced, or you've told that person to just go to the prosecutor's office and say, hey, I want you to dismiss this case. A lot of times, particularly when you're dealing with couples and domestic violence, you need to be very clear that it is the wish of the victim, but the state has an interest in those cases, and that's why a victim can't just say, well, I just don't want to dismiss it. There are very limited circumstances under which a victim can say, I don't want to prosecute, and the state be forced to actually dismiss the case.
So is it that individual that brought the charges, or is it the state that brought the charges?
It's the state that brings the charges. And even if you have an unwilling witness, most prosecutors are trained to deal with a difficult witness. So absent some very specific rules, you can be made to testify, you will have to come to court. So that's not how a case is normally dismissed. Now, there are some circumstances where facts were not as they were presented to a police officer and there is some confusion, but for the most part, that's not the case.
Okay, well, let's talk about, because we're running out of time, my producer over there dancing. So let's talk about the effect. Like, we go through this whole process, we don't qualify or are not offered pretrial diversion programs. What are some of the possible effects of convictions on your record, so much so that you would want to avoid even having to get into that situation?
Well, now, post 9/11, most companies and government agencies are conducting background checks to see what kind of criminal history employees and potential employees have. So before you even apply for a job, a lot of times they will run a criminal history on you to see what kind of person you are, kind of like your credit history. So you definitely don't want anything on your criminal history. That's why you have to guard it so closely, because even if you've had a situation when you were younger and it was sealed, so to speak, it still can create a problem if you get certain licenses. If you want to work for on Wall Street, maybe even as attorneys, you have to disclose certain things about your background. So it follows you. You want to be very, very careful about your criminal history.
So when I was a prosecutor and I heard the kids saying they want to get their county stripes and get their state stripes and their fed stripes, that's not a good idea.
No, that's not a good idea, because if ever you change your mind and then decide you want to...
You don't want to be striped anymore.
That's right. You still have a history that will follow you, and it's very difficult for you to sometimes obtain loans, even to go into the military if you have a certain criminal history, even though it's a very noble thing to do, a very patriotic thing to do. If you have certain things on your criminal history, you're just not a good candidate for anything, employment, and then that is really a problem when you can't see gainful employment, you can't obtain licenses for you to further your career. It's very, very frustrating, so that's why you need to be very careful.
So to sum it up, parents, it sounds like we need to make sure that know who our kids are hanging out with. Make sure that they know what the laws are that concern them. If they get into a situation, make sure that you get on it quickly to make sure that you're dealing with the prosecutor before anything ever gets filed.
Right.
Ask for a pretrial diversion program so that you can have the expungement process somewhere later on. And just overall, just don't get in trouble.
Absolutely.
Well, one thing about this show, Teri, it is about making sure that we provide resources and information so that parents can become more informed, students can become more informed, so that they don't get into situations that could potentially be crimes. So could you give our audience a resource of some sort that they can go and get more information about either the criminal justice system or how scenarios they can find out that are actually crimes? Where can they get more information? Is there anything out there that can kind of put it in there in terms that the parents can understand?
Sure, absolutely. There's one book that comes to mind. It's called Ignorance is No Defense, The Teenager's Guide to Georgia Law. It's written by J. Tom Morgan. It's a very good book that really explains the law so that laypersons can understand, parents and children can understand. And also, when you're talking about teenagers, you might want to visit your local juvenile court system.
Okay, what can I learn in juvenile court?
Well, the judges who would preside over those cases potentially that involve teens. Also, you could talk to the prosecutors and also the probation officers in juvenile court. And sometimes juvenile court has programs that even if your child has not been in trouble, they can still participate in. If you know your child has a problem with theft by shoplifting, but for the grace of God they've not been charged with anything, you might be able to contact that court and say, look, do you have any programs? They're not going to be free necessarily, and you can't just drop your child off at the juvenile court, but they have some resources that you may not consider. And also you might want to consider them for career days to come in and talk to young people. So they're very, very knowledgeable because it's a very specific court, and the laws are very unique for juveniles.
Wow. Well, that was a lot of great information that you shared with our audience. I want to thank you so much, Teri, for joining us. We have to have you come back again.
Thank you.
Parents, I hope that you took the information. Students, I hope that you took the information and not only take it, but apply it so that you don't get into these particular situations. Remember that Legally Speaking is every Sunday night at 6. And remember, until next time, with every right comes responsibility. So know your rights and accept your responsibilities. We'll see you next week.